Semiconductors, Taiwan and China continue to remain hot topics in 2024. And everyone stares at US when it comes to China versus Taiwan. People want the US to take some action and retaliate against China. Well, those are geopolitical challenges and we can hardly say anything sitting on our chairs. But what we can see is the ground level action. No. I'm not talking about anything about military or war-like action, but an industrial one. During COVID period, US announced that it will restart chip manufacturing in the country and become a global leader in it. Currently, Taiwan aces at manufacturing chips while US at designing them. In the previous episode, we talked about semiconductor industry in detail, where we understood the basics of supply chains, the types of chips, which countries have expertise in which process, and how did the overall industry perform. If you haven't watched it, then I recommend you to watch it because it is a sort of semiconductors 101 kind of episode. In this episode, we will understand what the US is doing. They have implemented the so-called CHIPS Act, but is it really working on ground? Let us find out. But before proceeding, hit that like button, subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon and share this episode with everyone. US enacted CHIPS and Science Act 2022. The act authorized around $280 billion over the next 5 to 7 years. But $174 billion has been for other than semiconductor related industries. $39 billion has been allocated for the construction of fabrication plants or fabs. $24 billion as tax credit to the tune of 25% to encourage semiconductor manufacturing firms to stay in the US, and $11 to $13 billion for research and workforce training. According to 2023 article of BCG, if the construction of fab should be completed by 2026, then the 10-year total cost of ownership or TCO will be somewhere between $35 billion to $43 billion, and those are estimates for 5 nanometer chips. Some reports suggest that if more matured chips are used, then it can also be done between $15 to $20 billion. Some also say that the cost of semiconductor plant in India for 65 nanometer range can be around $3 billion. Lower the nanometer, more advanced the chips are. So we can say that the cost can range between $3 billion to $40 billion depending on how advanced the fab is. So in the case of US, which specializes more in advanced chips, largely around 2 nanometer chips, the incentives are hardly sufficient to construct one plant. We all know that the government cannot sponsor all the fabs or even the entire project cost. But to get the perspective of how much money is required and how much incentives the countries are offering, this is a great benchmark. So let us see what's the response of the new policy is. Many companies have jumped to start manufacturing in US. Close to 89 new projects have been announced with proposed investments of more than $250 billion, which have a potential to create more than 45,000 jobs. However, the government has been slow in granting incentives to the companies. So far, only 5 projects out of 82 new projects, only 5 projects have been granted the awards. And those 5 projects belong to only 3 companies. A chunk of it has been to Global Foundries for its 2 projects whose size is $12.5 billion. So the implementation has been poor if we compare the number of announcements versus number of grants awarded. According to Wall Street Journal report, the environmental clearances remain a critical hurdle in getting the benefit of this act. The report states that on average, these clearances take 4.5 years to receive approvals. Producing chips in the US takes 25% longer and costs nearly 50% more than doing so in Asia. That's what many experts say. Delays and higher costs of construction and production are serious issues in the US currently. There is another important issue at hand for the US, and that is shortage of skilled workers. There is no doubt that the skills related to designing chips are not the problem. The most important issue is the skilled workers for manufacturing or those who can work at fabs. The issue here is of quality, quantity and cost, all of them. One study found that US will need 3 lakh more skilled workers to finish the ongoing projects, let alone the newer ones. So there is a shortage of talent. TSMC and Intel, both semiconductor giants, are facing labor issues in their US plants. TSMC planned two projects in US, one in Germany and one in Japan. Let us see what's their experiences so that we can understand how things are working in different countries too. The first project in US was announced in 2021. It planned to produce 5 nanometer chips. Now the plans have changed. It is now going to produce 3 nanometer and 4 nanometer chips. Also, there have been delays. So the production at the facility will only begin in 2025. In 2022, it announced another plant in the US. It intends to produce 3 nanometer chips and it expected that the production will begin by 2026. However, now, because of all these delays, it believes that it wouldn't be operational until 2027 or 2028. The initial project cost for one fab was $12 billion, but now with all the delays and another fab in pipeline, the total project cost has risen to $40 billion. TSMC announced that it will also start a fab in Japan in 2021 for $7 billion. The fab will initially provide foundry service with initial technology of 22 to 28 nanometer processes. The production in the plant has already started. Initially, everyone was skeptical of the tight schedule, but it has worked fabulously. It has now announced in 2024 that it will build another fab in Japan and that will be operational by 2027. It will manufacture 6 nanometer chips. Total investments in Japan are now amounting to $20 billion. Similarly, TSMC announced that it will set up another plant in Germany in 2023, the first of its kind in Europe. It said that it will get operational by 2027. The project cost is $11 billion and will use 22 to 28 nanometer process. So in all these examples and going by TSMC's experience, you can see that Japan has been the quickest to start production, followed by Germany and then US if we go by their current schedule. This apart, there are some other issues with the US. This is a screenshot from an article in National Review which says human aspects too may hinder success. Shang Yi Chiang, who headed TSMC's research and development department and also worked for American companies in Texas and California, is quoted in Miller's book as saying that people worked so much harder in Taiwan. If something broke at 1 a.m. in America, the engineer would fix it the next morning. Whereas at TSMC, they would fix it by 2 a.m. They do not complain, and their spouses do not complain either. Miller is the author of the book Chip War, the fight for the world's most critical technology. Further, it adds that Taiwanese students are much better than US students who become the future workforce. OECD's Program for International Student Assessment Score, which is PISA score for 15-year-old Taiwanese student is 531 on average in maths, which is 42 points above OECD baseline and 53 points above US average. US average is, by the way, below OECD's baseline by 11 points. Therefore, it highlights some core issues of the US labor and education markets. There are a couple of more things that one should take note of. First, the law says that the companies are subjected to a 10-year ban or are prohibited from producing chips more advanced than 28 nanometers in China and Russia if they are awarded subsidies under these acts. Thus, it signals what the US government wants. The government has boycotted China and Russia indirectly. Secondly, the government has allocated a huge sum to STEM education. More than 50 community colleges in 19 states have announced new or expanded curricula on semiconductors. That means a new workforce will automatically be created for these projects. One thing is clear for those who aspire to work in this industry is that this can be a good time to take admissions for such courses as the job will be in high demand in the coming years. And lastly, there are a few aspects about the law that can raise eyebrows. These provisions are not about allocation of funds or anything. They are about diversity, inclusion, and equity related issues. One of the aims is to improve diversity, that is, increasing representation of people of color and women in STEM field, ensuring that they are aware of the opportunities, removing of barriers if any, and there are also some provisions related to childcare facilities. Well, one can debate all these provisions, Personally, I am of the opinion that diversity, inclusivity, and equality are all important. They are important for every sector, any field, any region, everywhere. But that doesn't mean that one should embed such things in a law that wants to promote semiconductor manufacturing with an aim to surpass China one day. Therefore, I believe these provisions are unwarranted. Firstly, it can divert the attention of manufacturers away from the main business operations to compliances. Secondly, already the companies are finding it difficult to get skilled workers for this job. So, it is not a good idea to add more filters and costs to the already cumbersome procedure. And thirdly, these angles must be dealt in a different manner, say by changing some workplace laws or education related laws, or obviously the societal mindset. Adding them in a law will drag this process even more. So, overall, these are the things that I wanted to discuss with you, which are creating problems in US Chips Act. To conclude, I can say that companies want to manufacture in US and that's why we see so many applications. Secondly, academics will change in the next few years and probably US might be ahead of other countries in that aspect. So students can come here to learn. However, will they be able to find jobs in US? Probably not. Yes, there is a shortage of skilled people in US and better educational system can provide better job opportunities. But will there be enough companies when the first couple of cohorts enter the labor market? I have no idea. And to add to the trouble, incentives have not been granted to many companies. Their project costs are also increasing. So, in a way, US is in a tricky spot currently. If the regulations are eased, then things can speed up. But then comes the next question, costs. Cost of construction are sometimes 5 times higher compared to Taiwan. In such a scenario, will the US government increase the subsidy amount? No, look at the fiscal deficit and public debt figures. But all these things offset one thing, and that is geopolitics, in such a way that will reduce dependence on China and be prepared for the worst case scenario of China invading Taiwan. One thing is for sure, designing is something where the US is good at, and there are many other processes where US is good. So the question remains whether the US should explore more in the areas where it has more comparative advantage, like designing, or whether it should strive harder to attain something which it is not expert in, like manufacturing or fabs. So here is another slight diversion of absolute advantage versus comparative advantage. Many economists have said that one should look for comparative advantage. So if the US has comparative advantage in designing, then it should stick to it and progress in that segment. And other countries where they do not enjoy any comparative or absolute advantage in semiconductor industry, like say India, for example, what should they do? They should try their luck in something called as low value added segment, which is basically assembly and packaging and testing, these kinds of processes. But we have seen India is also doing good job in manufacturing, where the aim is to see made in India chip by the end of 2024 or early 2025. You never know how things can work, especially in a new sector like this. But this is for other countries where they do not have any kind of advantage. But in case of US and other countries where they have acquired some kind of advantage, what should be the best policy? That is a real question that the government and bureaucrats and many political pundits should think about. So, in the next couple of parts, we are going to talk about what policies other countries are implementing, and we will obviously analyze India's policy on semiconductors. See you soon, but do like this episode if you have learned something new today. Do share this and also subscribe to this channel for more such content. Let me know your thoughts about US Chips Act too. So, see you soon. Thank you.